Hi everybody, I'm Jeremy Siskind. I'm the proud author of these books, Playing Solo Jazz Piano. Jazz Piano Fundamentals, Book 1, month 1 through 6, months. And Playing Solo Jazz Piano, Book 2, months 7 through 12. And I've definitely had a bunch of people be like, you're supposed to cover that in 6 months. Seems like a lot. I think each one of those books has probably a year to 2 years worth of material, but I think you could move fast. Today what I want to talk to you about is what is modal jazz? And I want to talk with you about it because whenever I ask a class that question, I get answers that to me are insufficient, that aren't actually very good answers. And I think if we can understand exactly what modal jazz is and isn't, we can make some better decisions in terms of how to play modal jazz, how to come up with voicings for modal jazz, and how to listen to some music that might be modal. So these, of course, are just my opinions. Take them for what you will. But as always, I think my opinions are the best opinions. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a YouTube channel. Okay, so what is modal jazz? Now, like the most common answer I get when I ask that question is that it's jazz that like uses the modes. And all jazz uses modes to some degree, right? If you're playing like a 2-5-1, D minor 7 to G7 to C major, like in one telling, you're going to be improvising using D Dorian, G Mixolydian, and then C Ionian. So you're using the modes. All music to some degree uses modes. The distinction, in my opinion, and let's see if this will work here, is I like to think of the word modal as interacting with the word tonal. And let's just throw the word atonal up here too. And let's say, these aren't exactly opposites. Let's say that they're three categories, like, purple, blue, and green aren't opposites, but all three are colors. And they're all three distinct and different. Okay, so tonal, I believe, comes from the word leading tone. Right? The leading tone, I think a lot of you out there know this, is that note in the key, which is a half step below the root, which makes it feel like we're firmly in that key. So if we're in the key of C, major or minor, our leading tone is going to be B natural, right? Or in minor, if we're ever trying to change keys, one of the things that we need to do is introduce the leading tone in the new key, right? You can study modulations in Bach. One of the things that he'll always do is introduce the leading tone because we're not going to feel like we're in that new key until we have the leading tone. Now, another way of saying that, we have a leading tone is that we have some kind of a 5-to-1 progression, right? That's what I just played for you. I played 5-to-1 in C major and then 5-to-1 in C minor. Okay, so when we have the leading tone, we have these sorts of 5-to-1 progressions. And not only do we have them, but the music is kind of organized around them, right? It's not just that it's possible to have a 5-to-1 progression, it's that in a classical piece, the ending is just going to go back and forth 5-to-1 because that's the drama of the music. And in 99% of tonal jazz standards, the last two chords are the 5 chord and then the 1 chord. Maybe we have some exceptions where we have a I'll Be Seeing You. Which has a minor 4-to-1 at the end. Very unusual. And I could make a strong argument that the minor 4... So, okay, total digression. You get ready for a digression? Let's see if this works. So I'm in the key of E flat. I think that's where we usually play I'll Be Seeing You. So the ending of I'll Be Seeing You is A flat minor 6 to E flat major. I can make you a strong argument. A flat minor 6 is actually subbing. If you put a B flat under there, it's like a B flat sus flat 9. So those chords are maybe more related than we think. But like I said, total absolute digression. So tonal music has a leading tone, and it's organized around 5/1s. And, of course, if we have a 5/1 in jazz, it's often going to be a 2/5/1. Not all the time, but quite a lot of the time. Let's define atonal before we define tonal. Atonal generally means that consonance and dissonance is not really an organizing factor. So atonal music doesn't really think about resolving in any of the ways that we think of tonal music resolving. Okay, so in atonal, consonance basically is the same as dissonance, and any of the organizing principles of not only 5 and 1, but what we consider chords really goes out the window. In modal music, it's almost in between those two. So we are not going to organize around the principle of a leading tone. And so we're going to have very few 5-to-1 progressions. But we still have chords. So it's not atonal. So, consonances are still important. We might not have key centers. Certainly, we won't have key centers in the same way that tonal music has key centers. So in modal music, a few things happen when we take away the organizing principle of 5-to-1 progression. The first one is that we frequently are staying on chords for a long time. Right? If we're not anxious to get from a tension to a resolution, why not just hang out on a D minor chord for 16 bars like we do at the beginning of So What? Why not hang out on a D sus chord like we do in the first 4 measures of Yes and No? We also like to have different kinds of chords. So if we're not thinking about a major chord and a tonic minor chord as being the 1 chords, hey, different kinds of chords can enter the picture. Maybe we want to have more sus flat 9 kind of Phrygian chords. Maybe we want to make a Dorian chord the 1 chord. Maybe you want to make Mixolydian the 1 chord. So we can have more exotic kinds of chords, and we can also kind of position these chords differently if we don't need to be concerned with this leading tone at all times. And to that point, we might have kind of ambiguous key centers. Right? We might look at a tune and not be able to say what key it's necessarily in. Our key center might feel more like a mode than an actual key. And I think a really useful way of saying this is that we might focus on color change. So instead of focusing on tension or resolution, I might say, ooh, I really like the way this chord leads to this chord, 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 leads to this chord. And you might have thought, as you heard me play that it sounded kind of like a neo-soul progression. And in fact, I would say that the vast majority, if not all of neo-soul music, I would put into this modal class. And I'll give you one more consideration, and this one's maybe a little bit counterintuitive, but oftentimes the harmony is in the melody. I'll show you what I mean by that later. But when we look at modal chord progressions, they might not make a lot of sense. But when we look at modal melodies, they usually do make sense. There usually is a unifying scale, key center, or theme to them. So, and I will mention this is a tip I got from Gerald Clayton, who is one of my absolute favorite pianists of my generation. He said, if you're really trying to figure out how to play on a modal tune, don't try to get a chord scale for each chord. You can do that. That works. But instead, look at what's happening in the melody and what chord scale the melody is using, and use that as your guide. And I think that's really, really wise. So I want to look at a few modal tunes. But before we do that, I want to say one more thing about this, which is that, I've presented these three categories, and particularly modal and tonal, as though they're kind of exclusive, as though a piece is either modal or it's tonal. But in reality, almost every modal piece has some element of tonality. And in particular, as musicians, we are welcome to add tonal gestures, tonal flourishes, tonal chords, tonal reharmonizations to modal tunes. And the opposite to some degree is true. I wouldn't say that all tonal tunes have an element of being modal in it, but we're welcome to kind of turn tonal tunes into more modal tunes by maybe ignoring some of the 5-to-1 relationships in there. And maybe I can demonstrate that a little bit too. We'll see. I was going to say we'll see if we have time. The only time constraint is what you guys will watch. So we'll find out. Okay, so let's look at a couple tunes, and let's actually start with Recordame here. Because it's such a great, clear example of mixing modal and tonal. So, what do we have first? We have a Dorian chord, A minor 7th, right? And we really, really know it's Dorian if we doubt the chord symbol, because we have that raised 6 that's so typical of the Dorian mode in the melody. Okay, so if this were tonal, I would expect this A minor 7 to maybe last 2 or 4 beats, go to a D7, go to a G major, right? That's what Dorian chords do. Of course, this A minor 7 does not do it. Instead, it just lasts and lasts and lasts and lasts, and then it goes to a really, really unrelated chord, right? C minor 7, another Dorian chord. And that lasts and lasts and lasts. But then what happens? And so when I say that Recordame is such a great example of mixing a modal and tonal approach, then we actually do go to the 5. We go 2, C minor 7, 5, F7, 1, B flat major 7. And this sets off a cascade of 2-5-1s. This is how I teach my 2-5-1 exercises, going down in whole steps. We get B flat minor 7 to E flat 7 to A flat major, A flat minor to D flat 7 to G major, G minor to C7 to F major, and then we get a big old 5 chord, which leads us back to the beginning. So I would say in this tune, it's basically evenly split. The first 8-ish measures are modal, and then the next 8-ish measures are very tonal. So let me play it for you, just in case you want to soak in these sounds and think about modal versus tonal here. You want to see my hands, you're free to. All right, so an evenly split tune between modal and tonal. Let's look at Infant Eyes. I love this tune. I think this is such a beautiful tune. And as we look at it, we're going to get through the first 8 bars and see no 5-to-1 progressions, right? G minor goes to F minor, goes to E flat, goes to A, goes to G flat, goes to C minor, goes to E flat minor, goes to F minor, and then finally connecting the first section to the next section. This is where we have a tonal moment, B flat 7 to E flat. So pretty interesting. Within this section, there's no 5-to-1 progressions. We could probably call this modal rather than tonal. But then between the two sections, we do have a connector there. Okay. Then we get to the B section. This is just an ABA form. And we have a pedal point, pedal point, pedal point. We have a B major leads to F minor 7 over B flat. That leads to A flat minor, leads to B flat minor. So again, we don't have any 5 to 1 here. And then we have a 5 to 1 connecting the sections, right? And we go back to that original A section. So within this piece, the sections are modal, but the connections between them are tonal, which I think is kind of ingenious. So let me play this for you so you can get it into your ear. I'll play it twice. I'll leave the music up once, and then I'll let you see my hands once. Watch my hands while you watch the score. Feel free. What a beautiful tune. Let's just spend a second asking ourselves a couple questions about this tune. So the first thing is, I told you, this kind of Gerald Clayton trick about following the melody rather than the chords. And if I follow the melody, I see that I have C, E, D, G, A flat, B flat for the first 4 measures. And those are all notes of the E flat major scale. And that's not too outlandish, if we think about the chords, right? We have if we're thinking in E flat, we'd have the 3 chord, the 2 chord, and the 1 chord. And G minor and E flat major have quite a lot in common, right? G minor 7 makes up the 3, 5, 7, and 9 of E flat major. So, not that crazy. And then if we look at the second measure, we basically have E flat Dorian. We have, which of course is a shade of E flat minor. So we basically have 4 measures of E flat major and then 4 measures of E flat Dorian. And so if I'm improvising over this piece, yes, I could change chord scale every measure. I could do G Dorian, F Dorian, E flat Ionian, A probably half whole octatonic, G flat Lydian probably, etc., etc. Or I would prefer thinking about improvising using the E flat major scale. And then using E flat Dorian. much better result. Now, of course, there are going to be some avoid notes as you do that, or some notes that you don't want to leap to, some notes that you don't want to rest on. But overall, the result is going to be far superior if you do that. With that said, looking at this next 4 measures, I would have a hard time coming up with a single scale, right? He's really intentionally shifting between modes. It looks like he's, emphasizing E flat Ionian or E flat Lydian, and then E flat probably Phrygian, and then E flat Lydian, and then back to Phrygian. So there, I can't quite use that trick. But how about in those next 4 measures? Even though it's spelled with C sharp, D sharp, G sharp, we're actually pretty darn close to getting back to E flat Dorian. With this C flat here, I would say we're kind of using E flat Aeolian, which makes sense because that's going to be the same as B major. Okay. So I think thinking in these larger strokes defined by the melody is going to be really useful. Oh man, usually people don't watch more than 20 minutes, so I'm really going overboard. But let's do one last thing with this, and maybe I'll do a follow-up because I have more to say about voicings and such. But lastly, I want to just think about how Wayne Shorter perhaps got these chords. Where did they come from? Part of it is that Wayne Shorter is just a total genius, right? Let's just lay that out there. One of the greatest composers of our time, and certainly in the jazz repertoire. I think you should still be able to see well enough. But we can find certain relationships between them. So, okay. A, Wayne Shorter's genius. B, he probably wrote this melody first and then reharmonized the melody. But there are some really lovely relationships, right? It's not hard to see that there's stepwise motion in the bass, right? G to F to E flat, pretty clear. Then there's kind of this B flat to B flat connection in the melody. He writes an A7, not stepwise, but connects with that B flat melody. And then this is the one that I'm really kind of fascinated by, this G flat, this A7 to G flat. On the surface, they have nothing in common. But if you listen to the recording, Herbie Hancock always emphasizes an upper structure with this A7, which is the upper structure of a G flat chord, right? That's the 13th, flat 9th, and 3rd of an A7. Not that crazy. So there's actually this upper structure based connection between those two chords. If you're thinking of the A7 as G flat over A, then no, it's not that crazy to go from there to a G flat major. And then, yeah, check it out, stepwise bass, G flat to F, F to E flat. And then this kind of has a feeling of a 4 to 1, E flat down to B, B flat, which kind of brings us back to our I'll Be Seeing You. Infantize. What a brilliant tune. Okay, so let me get into a good camera for my conclusion here. Let's see, does that work? Yeah, that works. So that's a little bit about how I think about modal jazz and how it's different than what I would call tonal jazz. We don't really ever call tonal jazz, but I think that is the important distinction. Just like green and blue are two types of colors, tonal and modal and atonal are different kinds of harmonic structures. If you enjoyed that, you'll enjoy my books, Jazz Piano Fundamentals 2, 1, and Playing Solo Jazz Piano, where there is quite a bit about modal voicings and such. So I'd love to hear what you think about my definition of modal jazz. Feel free to poke holes. That's how I become a better teacher. And thanks for subscribing, liking, commenting, and just being the most delightful YouTube crowd on this darn platform.